When Brains Collide with Dr. Daniel Amen, today on the Faithful and True podcast. Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We are excited to let you know that today we have been joined for a second time by Dr. Daniel Amen of the Amen Clinics. He has granted us another opportunity to talk about his research, his studies, and his clinics, and his many awesome books. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Amen.
So great to be with you both again.
Yeah, thanks for taking time to be with us. And one of the things that we do here at Faithful and True is we really want to support couples that are on this journey of recovery. And we know that there can be a complexity to that. And we know with your expertise in brain imaging and just understanding the dynamic of the brain, we want to begin by just asking the question, what do you see as far as the relationship of brains in a coupleship? What is the importance of them, and how do our brains play out in the way we do relationships?
Well, if it's true, your brain is involved in everything you do and everything you are. It's to relationships, and nobody knows it. I mean, I know it. You gave one of my kids for more than 4 months, I'm scanning it. I mean, I have children, all of their partners have been scanned, and people think I use it to discriminate, and I don't. I use it to understand and then to see how they react. My youngest, who's 17, her boyfriend's mother killed herself. He found her when he was 12 years old. You bet I want to know his brain. And he had struggled with trauma and grief and anxiety, and you could see it in his scan. And he and I really bonded over helping him have a better brain, because with a better brain, you're going to have a better life. When I'd mentioned in the last podcast, I got divorced. It was the year 2000, and I told myself, if I ever got married again, the first part of her I wanted to see was her brain. And so I met Shanna 15 years ago. Almost to the day is when I scanned her. So after 2.5 weeks, I really liked her. Debbie knows her. Shanna's beautiful. She's smart. All of that is second to, so what's the health of your brain like? And so I scanned her, and it passed. And a couple of years later, we were married. It's central. When I first started doing imaging, I had this one couple, and I didn't like them because I knew I wasn't going to help them. 9 months, every week, the woman had a Ph.D. in grudge holding. She just beat things to death. In fact, one day I thought to myself, she's going to beat this into the afterlife. She's married to a guy who couldn't be on time, who was conflict-driven, and at 9 months, I'm in the shower getting ready to go to work, and these people are in my shower. I mean, in my head, I'm like, today I'm going to tell them to get divorced. Because when I thought about them on my schedule, my stomach started to hurt. Because I hate feeling helpless. And so I was going to tell them, but I grew up Catholic. Like, my mother was not kidding about the whole thing. And, divorce is a bad thing. And because I'm a bad therapist, they're going to go to hell. And I mean, all the stupid stuff in my head. And I got out of the shower, and I called my friend who owned the imaging center. And I said, would you give me 2 scans for the price of 1? And it was the first couple I'd ever scanned, but I didn't know what was, I just felt helpless. And she had an OCD brain, and he had an ADD brain. And I put her on Prozac and him on Ritalin, and I said, I don't want to see you guys for a month. I just want to see if I can get the meds to help us. And when they came back, a month later, they sat on the same couch. They had a really thoughtful discussion. They weren't fighting anymore. And I mean, it was just a story I'll never forget. They're still married. They like each other. She doesn't hold on to hers, and he's not conflict-driven. And that story has stuck with me. If the brain's not right, your relationships aren't right.
That's what I was going to say, is that same principle of if in order for my relationship to work, my brain needs to be cooperating. And, you kind of alluded to this, but I do think one of the places where we can feel the most helpless is when we are working with couples, because there's so many dynamics that are going on. And so to see the possibility of there being hope and healing for the brain and then the brain in relationships is incredibly empowering.
So would it be true, Daniel, that a husband and wife are often like puzzle pieces in terms of their neurochemistry? By that I mean like a huge amount of our population, as you mentioned earlier, struggles with ADD. And these would be the men coming to us with help for their sexual addiction. But their wives, I find when I'm working with them, are often the ones who are extremely organized and detail-driven, and the follow-through component of the relationship, so to speak, they're the ones that kind of hold it all together. I would guess if we could look at their brains, we would have those puzzle pieces that fit pretty well together.
Well, we've done a lot of couples, haven't we?
Yes.
And often the guy has a sleepy brain, especially his frontal lobes, and so he's got impulse control issues and makes bad decisions, and her frontal lobes are often working too hard, so she's organized, follows through, but she worries and holds on to things, and if things don't go a certain way, she gets upset. She can be a bit argumentative and oppositional, and balancing those two things helps them balance their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I like how you described it as puzzle pieces. And too often, marital therapists or people who are working with couples, they don't even think about the brain pattern of the people in front of them, which is sort of insane when you think of it, right? I mean, if the brain is involved in everything you do, including things like empathy and communication and listening and goal setting, that if the brain's too sleepy or too busy, it can disrupt a person's ability to act in ways that are consistent with what they want.
And I think that is such an important key, that idea of they struggle being consistent with what they want. Because in the nature of couples work, there can be a perception that he or she is not trying hard enough, that they don't care enough to change, or they don't love me enough to change. And so we start making meanings and messages about our spouse's choices or behaviors. And if this piece of neurochemistry is not brought into it, there's a misunderstanding. So it doesn't change the behavior and how I experience the behavior, but it's also not helping me understand what's driving the behavior. So in the absence of the information, I'm just left believing that it's about willpower or desire or love, versus the idea that his or her brain is actually limiting my ability to show up in the marriage the way that I would like to.
Absolutely correct. And I often make the distinction between will-driven behavior and brain-driven behavior.
That's good.
I was just on Dr. Phil today. We were just filming a new show. And this man had went through trauma, emotional trauma, lost his mother, lost his job, but he began to drink too much, ended up with cirrhosis of the liver, had a liver transplant. And if you look at his brain, it's devastated. He's not going to have any kind of relationship that's effective until we repair his brain. And most people never even think like that, which we're trying to change, which, Faithful and True has helped us, get that message to the world that if your brain's not right, you're not right. Always in the context of those four big circles: biology, brain; psychology, mind; social circle, how we connect to others; and spiritual circle, which is our faith and why we care. All of those are equally important, but you can't just spend your time as a therapist and completely miss one of the big circles. And most therapists actually miss the spiritual circle as well, as they do this psychosocial thing, but they're missing two big components to who and why people are the way they are.
One thing that I think is interesting, Daniel, is you mentioned two events, the loss of a parent and the loss of a job. And those are just common. We all at some point have those experiences or similar experiences. And so it's understanding, even in the context of a marriage, if my spouse goes through a significant loss, it makes perfect sense that if the neurochemistry and his capacity or her capacity to navigate that well is limited, all of that's going to be brought into the relationship. And so it's not just, I think of this once and then hopefully that will repair my marriage, but it's this ongoing question of how are my life circumstances and what we're experiencing, especially in an age of pandemic, how am I bringing the neurochemistry that is being changed through circumstances into my relationship on a daily basis?
So true. It's so important. Now, I do this with all of my patients. I do an exercise called the one-page miracle. On one piece of paper, I want to know what they want. What do you want in your relationships, your work, your money, your physical, emotional, spiritual health? It's a frontal function. So frontal lobes are involved in goal setting. So we write it down. And, my wife and I have written ours together, and it's super simple. We want a kind, caring, loving, supportive, passionate relationship. Always want that. Don't always feel like that. I get these rude thoughts that come into my head, but I don't let them out because it doesn't fit the goals I have in the relationships. And that's empowering, that I have an impact on how we do rather than I'm a victim of how she treats me, which I know I can make things better today, or I'm powerful, I can make things worse today. But if you don't start with what you want, if you don't tell your brain, what do you want? Your brain won't help you, even if it's healthy. So, yes, you want a healthy brain, but you also want to tell it what you want so that you go, does it fit? Does my behavior fit the goals I have for myself?
Well, you mentioned you have the capacity to maybe have a rude thought, but to hold on to it. There are many people that we work with that have that thought and want to be rude, and whatever part of the brain they need in order to filter that or contain that is missing. So in that combative relationship, what part of the brain do we need to encourage to be more present, to work as a filter to contain those rude thoughts or those rude actions so that they don't come out in the coupleship?
This is why you never let a child hit a soccer ball with their forehead. Because right underneath your forehead is the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's brake. It stops you from saying the first thought that comes into your mind. Jerry Seinfeld once said, the brain is a sneaky organ. We all have weird, crazy, stupid, sexual, violent thoughts that nobody should ever hear. And I spend so much time with my patients, don't say everything you think. I mean, tell me. But, they might get a thought they're a pedophile when they've never done anything to do that. They may have one, sexual thought about a teenage girl, and they go, oh, I'm a pedophile. And then they obsess, and then they go tell their wife about it. It's like, no. It's like, just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. Let's assess it. Let's evaluate it. And please don't let that out. Unless it really is a problem. If it really is a problem, we'll have to take care of it. But you should not say everything you think.
I hope our clients are hearing this one today.
Something tells me this is going to be a very popular podcast.
I think so. Well, I'd like to take a few minutes, Daniel, because you have so many books that are so helpful also. One of them I'd love for you to just take a minute to describe why the title is the way it is. It's The End of Mental Illness. Would you tell us what your thoughts are about that?
I love that book. I actually think that's my best book. It's a bold title, and if you don't read the introduction, you won't understand. You won't understand the title. I hate the term mental illness. It's shaming, it's stigmatizing, and it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Based on our brain imaging work, now 170,000 scans on patients from 150 countries, we've learned that most psychiatric illnesses are not mental health issues at all, but rather they are brain health issues that steal your mind. And this one idea changes everything. Get your brain right, and your mind will follow. We need to stop using the term mental illness, call them what they really are, brain health issues that steal your mind. And when we shift that perspective to brain health, decreases stigma, increases compliance, increases forgiveness and compassion from families. They begin to see depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, like you would see epilepsy or brain cancer. And we need to just break the paradigm that we're currently working under and create something that's completely new, which is what we do at Amen Clinics and, how we've shared our work together. And that's the whole idea. We need to change, psychiatry, because nobody wants to see a psychiatrist. Nobody wants to be labeled as defective or abnormal, but everybody wants a better brain. Yes. So what if mental health was really brain health? Yeah. And I'm super excited about changing the conversation from mental illness to brain health.
Well, and I also wonder what it is about the term mental illness that culturally seems very hopeless. That it's kind of like a label that I'm given that I'm going to have to live with the rest of my life. And maybe there's a slight glimmer of hope, but the hope is limited. But in the approach that you're talking about, where we consider the brain and all that it is able to do, and part of that is it is able to change, it suddenly changes the conversation around despair and labels to hopes and possibilities. And that is so much more inviting. And if for the entire family, we can talk about this in a way that is hopeful versus what can feel very hopeless.
Well, let me give you a cultural example. I'm also a child psychiatrist, and I did my child psychiatry fellowship in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii and Tripler Army Medical Center. And Hawaii is an Asian culture. Most people don't know that on the mainland. And 70% of the population is Japanese or Chinese. And Asian cultures are shame-based cultures that if you have a mental health problem, you think you're going to bring shame to your family, they'll lose faith, and they don't go for help until they're really sick. While those same families will do anything to give their child an advantage. so this new paradigm, they have no interest in psychiatry, but yet, if you're going to say, I can help your child's brain be better, they're all for that. And so, for a long time, I thought psychiatry's had a serious marketing problem because psychiatry hasn't done anything to decrease stigma. You can get Lady Gaga talking about, mental illness till the cows come home, and people still aren't going to want one. Right. But everybody is going to want a better brain. And we just need to change the conversation, and that's what the end of mental illness is all about.
Do you ever feel like you're the prophet, the voice crying out in the wilderness to an audience that isn't really receptive yet?
Well, there's actually a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. It was written in 1962 by Thomas Kuhn. And he says there's 5 stages to a revolution. The first, people begin to go, okay, there's a problem. And the status quo tries to put, Band-Aids on the problem. There's a new paradigm, and I would argue we developed a new paradigm. And stage 4 is the most predictable stage. The status quo rejects it. And stage 5 is the status quo dies, so progress in science happens through funerals, and a new group of people accept it. And I argue we are at 4.7, so we're close to flipping the script because we've already had 10,000 medical and mental health professionals refer people to us. And so the noise has calmed down a little bit about I'm a charlatan and a snake oil salesman and all the bad things people have said about me. And in 2016, Discover Magazine listed my research as one of the top 100 stories in science. So not in medicine, not in psychiatry. The story about imaging came in between Elon Musk going into energy and the discovery of a new dinosaur species. So I feel pretty good.
Yeah.
You should. You should.
And and it's why I eat right, and why I sleep, and why I take supplements, and why I live the message.
Right.
Because I want to outlive the critics, and I want to see us be better as a society.
Well, and using our language, you practice what you preach.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking we should change our names instead of mental health therapists, that we need to be brain health counselors, don't you think?
Absolutely. Well, Daniel, we know that a new book is coming out in March, and so we just want to take a moment for you to talk a little bit about that. You alluded to it in our first podcast, and just what is the nature of the book, and what are you hoping to come out of it?
The book is called Your Brain is Always Listening. Tame the hidden dragons that control your happiness, habits, and hang-ups. And it's in 4 sections. One is the dragons from the past. There are 13 of them. Like my primary dragon is the abandoned, invisible, or insignificant dragon, being one of 7, being the second son in a large Lebanese family. Nobody saw me growing up. And that really informed a lot of my life. But there's also the wounded dragon, the grief and loss dragon, the judgmental dragon. My favorite of all the dragons is the ancestral dragon, where the issues you have aren't yours. They're your mom's or your grandmother's issues. There's a section on the they, them, and other dragons, how other people impact our lives and how our brain's always listening to them. The scheming dragons, how society is damaging our brain and what your brain is listening to in society. Like there's the holiday dragon, which is, it's the holidays. I should just throw brain health out the window and wait till January to work on getting healthy, which is incredibly stupid. There's the addicted dragons. And I guess there's 5 sections. There's also the bad habit dragon, how to get control over the bad habits that your brain is always listening to. It's a really fun book. People can go to yourbrainisalwayslistening.com, and when they pre-order the book, I have some really great gifts for them.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much again for being with us. And, this is just evidence of the relationship that you and Mark had. And, one of the things I want to say is in that prophet, the crying out to the wilderness, Mark was always one of your strongest advocates. And like you've identified, so believed in what you were doing and saw how the work that he was doing around sexual addiction and the work that you were doing around brain health just married together so beautifully. And so, I know that I have been significantly influenced by you through Mark, by working with him for all these years. So we're very thankful that you were willing to take time to be with us today.
Yes, and I just want to add, Daniel, that your work has changed really the way that we've practiced here at Faithful and True, and it certainly began with Mark and me and how we worked with our clients, and it is continuing, I know, through the rest of our team here. So thank you, dear friend, for taking time. We know your time is precious, and you have a lot of people asking for it. So we really appreciate that and look forward to having this out there for all of our audience.
Well, you're so welcome. I loved Mark so much and was so sad when we lost him, but his work goes on, and I love you, and I'm here to be helpful as I can.
Well, we appreciate you greatly. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for our viewers and listeners, we thank you for your loyalty. We thank you for listening and watching today. We are new to the world of YouTube, and we appreciate you subscribing to the Faithful and True channel. We appreciate you listening to our audio versions of our podcasts as well. And we just encourage you to go on, like us, subscribe to us, and let us know how we're doing, because shows like today's podcast with Dr. Amen is powerful, encouraging words. So until we meet you again next week, we thank you, and we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.